Good afternoon to one and all present and joined for today's live session. I, Dr. Ilangovan Kariyappan, Assistant Innovation Director, on behalf of Ministry of HRD Innovation Cell, welcome you all to India's first leadership talk series, which would start in next few seconds from now. I welcome Shri Anand Mahindra ji, Chairman Mahindra Group, and Dr. Abhay Jare, Chief Innovation Officer, Ministry of HRD Innovation Cell. I request you all to keenly listen to this talk and get benefited. Thank you, and over to you, sir, please.
So we'll start. So welcome, my dear friends, to the first edition of India First Leadership Talk Series. The primary objective behind this Leadership Talk Series is to give opportunity to our college kids, to students, youngsters, to listen to great leaders and actually get benefited by their experiences, their successes, their failures, which will help you in your professional life. So when we were conceptualizing this India First Leadership Talk Series at MHRD, the first name which came to our mind to kickstart this initiative was Shri Anand Mahindra. And we requested him, and we are extremely thankful to you, sir, for accepting our request.
It's a pleasure.
I think today we are live in more than 1,000+ institutions, and I will be really happy, and it's a pleasure to have you. So the format of this was, once you accepted our invitation, we actually created a form and circulated it across all the institutes in India, asking students that whether they have any questions in their mind, which I can ask you on their behalf. Unfortunately, sir, we received more than 500+ questions from almost every part of India. So when we analyzed those questions, we bucketed into 3 or 4 categories. There were a lot of questions related to innovation and Mahindra Group and your approach. The second category was mostly into your leadership and what you think as a leader and those kind of things, your successes, your failures. The third category was into startups, how you personally look at some of the startup ecosystem and those kind of things. And finally, the last category was more related to Mahindra core businesses. But we will be taking a couple of questions in each of the category. And in this 45 minutes, sir, we will be really thankful if you can share with some of the experiences which you have never shared before. So, sir, as our students are young, they are just coming out of the college, or in next couple of years, they will graduate. They feel there is a lot of anxiety, what they should do, what they should not do, whether they should go for a job or they should get into entrepreneurship. But when you get into a field, a lot of different things are required. So do you want to actually talk about or share, based on your experience, some things which are never taught in school or college, but which are very, very important for success in professional career?
So Abhay, first of all, I want to thank you,
Thank you, sir.
and the Ministry of HRD for inviting me. I think it's an enormous compliment that you've asked me to kick this series off. I'm not sure I deserve the honor you've given, and I want to say hello to whoever's watching. It's an absolute privilege to talk to all of you. My only complaint with Abhay was that I had hoped this would be interactive, where I could, in fact, engage in a conversation with all of you. Unfortunately, we seem to have some technology constraints, but one day I hope you'll enable me to do that. Certainly, as well, sir, where I can learn as well. I look for payback. I'm a businessman, and I say if I'm going to spend time, then I wanted to pick your brains as well. Today it's going to be a one-way talk with Abhay doing most of the picking, but one day I hope to have more of a conversation, a real conversation with you. But coming back to your question, Abhay, about what they can't teach you, that's an ironic thing to talk to all of you about, because you all are at institutions and are looking for your time to be well spent over there. But there are things which you cannot pick up in an institution. And one of the famous books was What They Don't Teach You at HBS, at Harvard Business School. Now, I went to Harvard Business School, so I should not be disrespectful, but I'm just going to play on the HBS terminology and share with you, Abhay, that using that HBS acronym, I'm saying that the things that you have to teach yourself and which they don't teach you at HBS are, in fact, first, H, humility. Humility is something that often is inversely proportionate to the prestige of the institution you're in. Sometimes you go to an IIT or to an IIM or HBS, humility becomes a casualty. And my first suggestion to you would be never lose that humility. And I don't say this only to sound very virtuous. I want to tell you that in my entire career, the one thing that I've been rewarded by is by trying to be humble and to try to defer to other people's points of view when possible. And I think that has stood me in very good stead. The second one, interestingly, looking at the B, is brevity. There is an old book called The Argumentative Indian. As Indians, we tend to go on, to be verbose, to complicate matters. That when we speak, we often speak too much. And so in that sense, I would say brevity is going to be a virtue that you need to cultivate. When you are brief in your communications, when you are brief in terms of your actions, you are biased in favor of simplicity. And I believe that sometimes the greatest of all problems can be solved by taking an approach to simplify things. And the final S from HBS is self-awareness, I would say.
Very true.
Self-awareness is again something that is not part of the curriculum of a business school or of any other institution. Because you need to understand what your motives are. जीवन का आपका क्या लक्ष्य है? That is about self-awareness. Why are you doing what you do? Once you understand your own motivations, what makes you tick, I know that you will make the right choices, and when you make the right choices for your own life, you will be a happier person. In my opinion, happier people are usually more successful people.
So, sir, you talked about motivation. You went to Harvard School initially for studying films.
Yes.
Then you got into business. So what was your motivation initially when you chose for films or courses in that, and then you switched to the business part of it?
Well, it's interesting. I was a sort of rebel when I was growing up. I tended to question everything. I was a voracious reader. I started reading I read philosophy, the Western philosophers. I read about existentialism, which questioned life itself. And I remember at the age of 16 asking myself what the purpose of everything was. I was born into a business family, so ironically, it seemed as if my life had been already plotted out for me. So what I was rebelling against was the concept of some other person, even though they might be my parents or my family business, plotting out my course for me. And I did not want to follow what seemed like a path charted out by somebody else. When I was in college here, I in fact I almost joined the Communist Party of India because I was rebelling. I guess I was rebelling away against all the givens, the fixed coordinates in my life that had been handed to me. I obviously wanted to create my own canvas. And so I was in any case of a bent of mind which was more right-brained. I tended to be very fond of art and cinema. And so when I went to Harvard College, this is not the business school, this is undergraduate, I found the liberal arts system was liberating. because it didn't force you to choose at the age of 15, which is what I was when I graduated from high school. And everybody thought, acha, abhi ladka engineer banega, then he'll go to IIT. I did go to IIT entrance, Agarwal's classes many years ago. I went to a college, Elphinstone, for 1 week for science. I had a miserable time. And I said, this is not for me. And then I went to JJ College of Architecture. I didn't have the courage to say I wanted to do cinema. I thought people will think I'm nuts. So I chose a happy medium. Architecture seemed to be the nice midpoint of engineering and arts. Look how fate worked. JJ College of Architecture was on strike for 9 months. It was agitating to become part of the accreditation system. So I was wasting my time. I was in protest marches with a headband, long hair, with my T-square going around Flora Fountain in Mumbai. And I found that I had really been wasting my time. So that's when I applied abroad. I applied to 3 architectural colleges and 1 liberal arts college. And the biggest thing, the benefit for me was I got into a liberal arts college where effectively, under the American system, they give you 4 years to play around in a sandbox and discover what you might want to do. That's when I said I really was passionate about cinema. And so I majored in cinema and photography. And that was what my bachelor's was for. Interestingly, my student thesis film did very well. And when it did, I made a film on the Kumbh Mela, by the way, and I went to Rishikesh. I felt a sense of release. I had made my point. So I suppose when all of us are growing up, we do have a rebellious person inside us. We need to feed that. I will always argue as a parent in favor of allowing a child to experiment, to do things which are off the beaten track. And when I had proved my point, and what was my point? My point simply was this. I did not want to end my life saying, no matter how successful he was in business, he inherited everything. His parents gave him everything on a silver spoon. वो मेरे सिर में नहीं बैठ रहा था. And I said, जितनी भी मेहनत मैं करूँ, अगर सब लोग कहने वाले हैं कि ये तो उनको बस थाली पे मिला था सामने.
Very true.
और क्या मेहनत उन्हें खुद की. I didn't like that idea, and so I wanted to do something in such a different area where nobody could say that my parents helped me. Which is why when I did film, it released me.
So when you decided to take on a rebellious path or an uncharted territory as compared to your background, you must have seen a lot of failures. And there are a large number of questions which we are actually receiving from students because initially they see failures a lot in their life. Yeah? As you can read in newspapers, a lot of suicides, those kind of things happening, a lot of stress, especially for success. So, sir, whether you saw similar failures in your life and how actually you deal or how you dealt with those failures?
Show me one person who has not dealt with failure. Frankly, I think understanding what that word means and understanding how to cope with it is probably one of the single most important lessons that we have to teach ourselves in life. Nobody's going to teach you this. And it comes back to my S in the HBS philosophy of self-awareness. To me, you have to understand who you are, what you want to achieve. When we talk about failure, there is a very, very standard story people will tell you, oh, get up, dust yourself off, you're only successful if you know how to fail. And that's true, all of that is true. But I can certainly sympathize with you if you're sitting there and saying, how does that help me to actually cope with the emotions that arise when you fail? So let me share with you on a very granular level rather than giving you gyan. How do I cope with a kind of failure? What do I do when I actually find that I have failed in something, whether it is in personal life or whether it's in professional life? The first thing that I do is I allow myself to feel bad. People always tell you, no, take failure in your stride, you should bounce back. Yes, we will talk about bouncing back. But when you resist the emotions that come with failure, that leads, in my opinion, to bottling up things which then sooner or later are going to emerge. So I allow myself what I call terror and tears. That's what happens. You initially feel a sense of terror that you have failed. I've let down my parents, I've let down my colleagues, I've let down my peers. all these kinds of feelings come. Don't suppress those. Allow yourself to feel the terror. Allow yourself to cry. Allow yourself those tears. Once you've done that, you'll enter a second phase where you simply feel low. Allow yourself to feel low. Take time off. Travel somewhere. Go away. Go swimming where you're alone and you're not with a mobile phone. Allow yourself to get away from it all and just absorb the feeling. There is a kind of, in our own Indian spirituality, there is a philosophy about absorbing things, about not having resistance, about acceptance. So you have to go through a phase where you accept the failure. I guarantee you, if you go through a part where you allow yourself the terror and the tears, where you allow yourself a little bit of time out and of getting away from it all and absorbing that pain, if you have conviction, if you have a bias for action, you know what's going to happen? You'll simply get bored of doing nothing. You will get bored of feeling sorry for yourself. You will have no room for self-pity. You will say, I've been there, I've done that, I've experienced all of this. Now I'm not going to sit around and do nothing. But you will not get to that point unless you allow yourself to feel the terror, allow yourself to distance yourself from the world as it is for a while. And I guarantee you, you will bounce back. That's, to my mind, advice I can give you from my personal experience.
So, sir, at this juncture of your life, when you have seen so many successes and so many failures, you have evolved these ways of handling the failures. But when you were young, 15, 20, 22, where all these students are, at that time also you use the same philosophy, or this philosophy has actually come from experience? Or at that time you were different? And
I was not any Bal Yogi who knew how to cope with failure. We'll all learn this from experience, Abhay. It's come from experience. When we're in school, sometimes failure is the most terrifying. As we all know, high school is a terrifying place because children are merciless usually on each other. They're not even polite. If somebody fails, they'll tell you, oh, you loser. Children don't have any politeness or etiquette. So high school usually is a terrifying place. I then went into Harvard Business School, and you are sitting in a section of 90 classmates who are amongst the smartest people in the world.
Yes.
Now, I graduated first in my class in high school here. So I thought I was the cat's whiskers when I went to the college, for example. And suddenly I find I'm in Harvard College with some of the brightest people. In my first essay on English, and I was the star in English in my school, I got one of the highest scores. I got a C grade. I was terrified. I sat down, I felt like calling my parents and saying I want to come home. And I had to cope with humiliation, self-doubt. I had no philosophy ready. But I went through exactly what I described. So what I've shared away is my own experience. The only good thing when I look back is I allowed myself to feel terrified. I allowed myself to feel the fear of self-doubt. Am I capable of surviving with such competition? I went through it again in business school. I went through it in Harvard College, so you get deconstructed. But what happens is your ego gets deconstructed. And you learn something I talked to you about first, humility. So the best thing that happened to me, because I went to to college and business school, which are amongst the finest in the world, I came to terms right away with the fact that I was not the smartest person in the world, which I may have thought. If you graduate first in your high school, you think that.
yes,
And I went there, I was basically chipped away, my ego was chipped at, and I think the biggest lessons I am carrying with me, as I said, is I have the humility to know that you are not necessarily the smartest person in the world, but you will survive.
Fantastic, sir. So the primary objective of this entire initiative is to look at great leaders. For us and for the youngsters, someone like Anand Mahindra has been immensely successful, is a really great leader. Who is the great leader for Anand Mahindra?
You know, it's interesting, people have always asked this question, and it comes in various forms. It's who's your role model, who do you admire the most? I had a very interesting set of parents who I didn't mention, I must give them credit. I talked earlier about being rebellious, but it was not really because of them. My father was very thrilled when he thought I was going to be a filmmaker and not a businessman. My mother actually was in the Indian movie industry for a while, so she was also very pleased. They had a very simple philosophy, is that we will give you education, after that you're on your own. But my mother used to always tell me, never find one role model. Never say, this is the one person I'm going to model yourself after. Because every person is human. Everybody has flaws. Try and create a kind of jigsaw puzzle, a kind of mosaic of the best people who you think are people you admire, and then put together that and try and find out people who are great leaders. But if you ask me not who was a great leader in my opinion, but what is the quality of great leaders, that I can tell you what I believe. And to my mind, it's very simple. A leader is one who has followers. Right. If you don't have followers, you're not a leader.
Yeah, very obvious.
Why do people follow anyone? So let's ask that question now. So if I'm defining a leader as someone who has followers, why is that person following this leader? I think the greatest quality of a leader, there are many, but in the interest of brevity, which I advocated, let me say to you this, that a leader is one who has ideas. You are not going to follow somebody unless they paint a picture to you of a future, of a desirable, aspirational destination or future. So a leader has to have ideas which are captivating, which engage. But the second and most important part is that a great leader is one who does not take complete ownership of that idea. A great leader is one who makes the followers believe that it was your idea.
Right.
So my simple message, which I talked about in our management conference, is that let's take Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi taught us how to fight for independence. But the idea of being free belonged to the people of India.
Very true.
He never said, freedom is my idea. Freedom was our birthright. That was not him, but I think that was the philosophy.
Yes.
So, to my mind, a great leader is one who has tremendous vision and captivates you with a destination. But it's also a great leader is one who makes you believe that it is your idea. So the ownership of the idea has to belong to your followers.
So, sir, in government, especially at Ministry of MHRD, we believe that if India has to emerge as global leader, innovation is very, very critical for us. And I think through your Mahindra Rise initiatives and those within Mahindra Group, also you are stressing on a lot of innovation. So, sir, what are your thoughts about how we can actually ensure that innovation becomes the real fulcrum of our not only just manufacturing sector, but also education in that sense? What are your views on that?
It is one of the most important questions of our time, Abhay, so I'm very glad that all of you brought this question up. First of all, just as a digression, I want to mention that to me, we have to be very careful to understand that jugaad is not innovation.
Very true, sir. Very true.
In my own Twitter account, I often like posting pictures of interesting jugaads, of how people cope and so on. But I never want people to think that I am advocating a philosophy of only making do. We have done that for too long.
Yes.
It helped us as a developing country when we had no resources. But cutting edge technological change comes not from jugaad, it comes from really disruptive thinking. It's not about piecing things together and making a chalta hai solution. So I have said before that we need to move from jugaad to jhakas. Something has to be jhakas, no longer jugaad. And jhakas, for those who don't understand the term, it's a very local term. It is about something which is wow factor, which is mind-blowing. Yes. So in that sense, I think innovation we have to define first. Coming back to your second question of how do we make it the fulcrum of our lives, I can only share to you, Abhay, what we do in our company. I can't pontificate and preach to you about what happens elsewhere. But what I think in companies people have to do in order to institutionalize a culture of innovation, Number one, the leadership has to send a signal very clearly that innovation is critical. So I see my job as using every opportunity to tell people that innovation is critical. So we have an innovation mailer. We give a RISE awards for innovation. We even have a RISE award for the failed innovation, the best failed innovation. Since we were talking about failure, I thought I'd bring that up. These are all signals about why innovation is important. Second, after the signal, you have to create a culture within the company that supports innovation. So if you have a system of measurement of performance, your performance measurement system must include innovation as a criterion for recognition, for compensation. So it's like this, you have to populate your entire corporate ecosystem with signals and signs that innovation is critical. Finally, and this is a longer topic, so but I will try and say it very briefly, is that I find that innovators are usually people who are entrepreneurial, people who like taking credit and receiving the benefits of their innovation. And in that sense, I think that is why in the last decades, there has been a perception that really cutting edge innovation comes only from startups, comes only from Silicon Valley, comes from the IIT person who's left and started his or her own firm. My view is different. I think that now we have entered a new phase of what I call the corporate garage. Because companies have learned that they will not survive unless they are able to foster innovation. So they are imitating elements of the Silicon Valley ecosystem and bringing that inside large companies. We are doing the same thing. What are those elements? Autonomy, empowerment, recognition of these entrepreneurs, and sharing of the wealth. So we have a very strong stock option scheme. So people right away know that if I am innovative, if I am able to help this company's profits grow, I will get a share of that profit. We also have a strong startup culture within the group. So we have intrapreneurship. People come in, a person working in our automotive business, for example, she went out and started a truck sharing business called Smart Shift. Now she got a piece of that equity. So we foster, we not only signal, we not only recognize, but you must reward entrepreneurship and innovation. If you do that, then I think in large companies, we will be able to make innovation a fulcrum of our strategy.
Another very interesting question which comes from students is that whether the leadership styles are different for a when you are handling a small scale industry, when you are vis-a-vis when you are handling a medium scale industry or a large scale industry. Whether you see a difference that some leadership styles at these level are transactional, while for more of a large scale, the leadership has to be more of a transformational style. Do you see any difference, or it's more or less the same?
You know, the word transactional has become a pejorative word. If you ask somebody, would you prefer to be a transactional or a transformational leader? Let's face it, 99% of people are not going to say transactional.
But whether that is the reality?
To my mind, let's change the nomenclature.
Okay.
Because transactional has become pejorative. It sounds like somebody who doesn't have vision, who doesn't care for the long term, and so on and so forth. Let's call it that you have, yes, people who are transformers, and you have people who are executors. So some people have to be better, some people are better at not envisioning change, but they're outstanding leaders when it comes to implementing change. Once again, it comes back to self-awareness. If you tell yourself, I'm a transformer, but you're actually an executor, you're going to be miserable all your life. You're going to find failure, and you're not going to be able to cope with it. Because you're constantly going to chase success in a form which is destined for failure. Self-awareness comes back to that S part. So to my mind, it is not about companies. Every company, perhaps in a smaller company, in a startup, transformational leadership is more important because they have to have a vision. They have to be able to look at circumstances and disrupt them. They have to come out with new ways of doing things. A startup will not survive unless it creates and innovates new ways of doing business. That's not transactional. That's not about execution. That's about envisioning a whole new future. Elon Musk was an entrepreneur. He started with a small company. I think nobody is going to say he's transactional, or that he was transactional when he was a small company and now it's transformational. No, I think people are either transformers or executors. You need them, whether you're a small company or a large company, you need a mix of these categories and segments of people in these companies in order for them to succeed.
So, while answering this question, you talked about startups. While talking about innovation also, you talked about startups. We are getting a lot of questions from students, especially engineering graduates, who are keen on now doing startups because there is a lot of buzz around startups. So as Mahindra Group, as Anand Mahindra, what is your advice or what is your suggestions to them? Whether they should actually go for a job and then go for a startup or an entrepreneurship, or whether they should directly jump into it, because these questions could sound quite naive, but these are the questions which actually students face while they are making decisions in their life at that juncture.
No, it's a very relevant question, and at the risk of being repetitive, let me once again go back to the self-awareness. My first advice is, do you understand what you want out of life? Suppose there's a person feeling enormously pressured because his elder siblings have gone to Bangalore or Silicon Valley and become successful entrepreneurs doing some startup. But if that person knows that, you know what, my mission in life is to teach, because that's where I get pleasure. So I know you're young, but try and examine what was the activity that gave you the most pleasure. If you spent a weekend going into a slum area and teaching the children there, and you said, you know, I have never gotten as much contentment as I did then you have to ask yourself, perhaps teaching is your mission, perhaps helping people is your mission. What is it that gave you the greatest pleasure? And you have to be brutally honest. Some people might say, no, I want global recognition. Somebody might say, I want enormous wealth. There could be reasons. I'm not making a judgment on any of these desires. You just have to know it. Sometimes people who just wanted to get very rich and said, I want to be on the Forbes list of richest people, that's fine, they succeed as well. We should not be sitting there condemning them. But they succeed not because they had that goal, but because they knew that that's what they wanted. You cannot take somebody who was going to be happier teaching and make them work at something. So know yourself, be self-aware. You don't have to be an entrepreneur. Starting out a rival to Flipkart is not the only future in the world. But once you decide you want to be in business, even if you want to be an entrepreneur, you have to judge what is your risk aversion, what is your appetite for risk. And so there are ways in which you can calibrate what you do. If you have a strong appetite for risk, you may take the chance of starting up in a garage on your own with your own money. If you don't have such a strong appetite for risk, but still are innovative and want to be entrepreneurial or want to be working for yourself or pursuing your own unique ideas, my job as Mahindra Group is to reach out to you and say, come to Mahindra. We have an ecosystem which will allow you to be an intrapreneur. You will get a much more fortified garage which already has tools in it, rather than a garage where you will be starting with zero. We will give you a fully equipped garage. We will give you a network of customers. Come with your idea and be an intrapreneur at Mahindra. So I think today you have the whole gamut. You can start by saying, no, I don't want to be in business. I want to be a teacher, or I want to be in a non-profit. I yesterday only met the Indian professor from MIT who started edX, which is today one of the world's largest educational portals. And he's a Marwadi. He said, I'm a Marwadi, so I understand business. But he knew and he decided his life was being a teacher. And then it was in being an entrepreneur, but in a non-profit venture called edX. So like him, once you calibrate where you want to be, you have all these possibilities. Being in a non-profit, if your appetite for risk is high, starting on your own. If it is not, coming into an ecosystem like Mahindra's where you can be an entrepreneur, you can innovate, but with a safety net under you. So many options. Know yourself before you choose one.
You rightly said about the mindset, what you want. Sometimes students or youngsters in different phase of their life stress themselves beyond a point. Initially, the stresses for getting a job or starting an entrepreneur, then it's maintaining the position, and then it's growing. And usually it happens that while we are chasing a dream, we end up losing the work-life balance. So you are such a one of the most busiest person in India. How you maintain your work-life balance?
There are many answers to this question that have arisen in the past. And one of the more commonly cited ones is that if you love your work, then you don't need a balance, because you get so much joy out of it that this becomes a false dichotomy, as they call it, to choose between work and life. Work then is life, and life is work, and the two blend, because you are getting the joy out of your work, which enhances your life. Somehow in the 50s, in the Western industrial model of development and of work life, of work style, there became this whole idea of we have to get up in the morning, there's 9 to 5, and then when the 5 p.m. the bell rings and I can go out, that's when my life begins. It's unfortunate. It's been completely drilled into us that there is this dichotomy. Happily, two things have evolved. One is that the world is more affluent. Less and less people have to work just to feed themselves, have to take any job that is available. That situation obviously remains, certainly in a developing country like ours, but more and more people are getting options. So you certainly don't have to work only for a living. The other thing that is changing is the atmosphere at work, the kind of ability to tailor-make a working environment for people's desires has tremendously evolved. And the most cited one, of course, is Google. Everyone knows that if you go into a Google workplace, there's flexibility, there's options for recreation, there are exciting cafeteria. Now that's become almost a standard dhancha or template for people who are designing offices. And I have to say, we at Mahindra have learned from that too. We have a number of companies that figure on the best places to work in India, and all of them do because we are building in all of these elements which allow people to remove this false dichotomy. Our goal at Mahindra is, when you get up every morning, you should be waiting to go to work. You should not be going saying, my eye is on the bell when I can come back and leave. We want you to jump out of bed and want to get to work. That's our goal. And I think every company in the world is working towards that. So hopefully, Abhay, 10, 15 years from now, the question will be redundant. The phrase work-life balance will be extinct. We will say work is life and life is work, because they are about getting the best out of myself as a human being. They are about maximizing my sort of, you remember the Maslow's law of hierarchies,
yes,
which is getting to a kind of transcendence, to a self-fulfillment. That will be achieved at work. And we will no longer have Abhay asking this question 15 years from now.
So there is another very interesting question which has come out from students. It's on business model. So students are keen on knowing what are the future business model, whether it will be a collaborative ecosystem based or it will be purely competitive base of business model, which we will see in future.
It's going to sound like I'm actually trotting out the same answer, but once again, Abhay, this is a false dichotomy that is waiting to be exposed. There was a wonderful book that somebody, a business school professor, wrote called Collaborating to Compete. Some of you may have read that. So by coining that phrase, collaborating to compete, they removed that dichotomy. What that title or that phrase actually means is that you cannot compete today unless you have some collaborative elements in your system.
Open innovation.
It doesn't mean that we have turned into some utopia where we are living in a commune, and we are all happy and moving around with orange robes and we are all dancing and we are all cooperating and there's no competition. No. The capitalist system, which has proven to be a wealth creating system, is based on competition. So you will never do away with competition. Competition is the capitalist way and I use capitalist in the positive sense here, of ensuring that the best outcomes happen. We saw that in a socialist economy. Unfortunately, though the intentions are good, the aspirations and the ideals are good, the system doesn't allow for merit to flourish, it doesn't allow for innovation to flourish, it doesn't allow for productivity to grow, and hence the quality of life does not improve. Competition ensures the best use of finite resources, which is why you get more sophisticated and efficient outcomes. So competition will never go away, neither should we want it to be. What that phrase collaborating to compete means is that competition is becoming so intense that you will have to find ways in building your differentiated business model. You will not be able to do it in an ivory tower. You will have to do it by cooperating and collaborating with some other elements in the ecosystem. It might be by outsourcing production. It might be by outsourcing manufacturing as well as some parts of your value chain which are not critical. You may have to find a kind of customer base which becomes a bread and butter customer for you, buys into your company, and then you use that scale. There are myriad ways in which you can define collaborating to compete. But essentially you have to figure out what in your ecosystem affords collaboration in order to allow you to differentiate yourself and hence compete better.
So, sir, I think we are towards the end of the entire session. We are getting a lot of interesting still questions, but there is one question which I personally want to ask on a lighter note. You actually graduated in films in that area. You never felt that you want to get into Bollywood, run around trees, dance on in the
you know, as my
do romantic songs.
I was always behind the camera. My degree in film was in filmmaking, and as my daughters always told me, they said, you know, Dad, if you ever get into movies, you'd make a great villain, and you'd look with your mustache and everything else, you'd make a good Daku. So once, if my businesses ever fail, I will probably go to some film producer and say, let me compete and try and take the villain's role in some movie. So that still remains one of my ambitions.
So no, I don't agree with that, but whether you actually never thought at that time into production or getting into a completely...
No, as I told you, going back to the question, I talked about rebellion. I told you that I made a film on the Kumbh Mela and so on. And I have to admit that once that film got a very strong grade and approval, I felt a sense of relief. Meri kranti khatam ho gayi udhar. I said, chalo, you know, meri vijay ho gayi. I have proved my point. I have showed the world that no, even if Anand Mahindra succeeds in business, nobody will say, isko to madad mili thi, khud nahi kar pata. Nobody is going to say he would never have made it on his own, because if somebody tells me that, I'll look them in the eye and say, you know what, I went into filmmaking. And my father was not there, my mother was not there, nobody helped me, and I made a success of my film. That confidence that it gave me is what has held me through life. So my purpose of being there, I felt a sense of release, and then I felt, yes, I can go in and apply that creativity to business, which will be just as satisfying. So when I look back, I think the events have conspired to allow me to rebel, give me the confidence, retain my passion for cinema, but hopefully bring some creativity into the business endeavors that I have initiated.
So it was fantastic talking to you, Anandji.
Thank you.
I think our students would have certainly learned a lot from what you have shared, especially how to handle failures, because I think out of 500 plus questions, 100 questions were around failures. So it was very, very critical that we address those kind of questions. And this is part of our Smart India Hackathon initiative. I would like to actually take this opportunity to share with you all that currently the entries for Smart India Hackathon are out. The deadline is on 20th of January. So we want students to submit as many entries as possible and compete. So to submit entries, go on Smart India Hackathon website, sh.gov.in. And sir, would you like to say that students should follow our MIC channel, web channel and if you can appeal, that will be great.
I joined the appeal Abhay has done. I think I must commend him and the Ministry of HRD for this very innovative. We talked about innovation.
Yes.
I have to say what we are doing here today is innovative. So my hats off to you and to the ministry for taking on this very, very disruptive method of reaching out to people, using the power of digital technology to reach out. And please do watch this MIC channel which they have instituted.
And
Thank you all.
And follow us, Anandji, on Twitter at Anand Mahindra, and you can follow me on Twitter at my handle is Abhay Jere. So thank you very much for joining us. Next time we will be with some other personality, and he will be sharing, the other person will be sharing with us his experiences. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Sir. Thank you very much.